Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair and author Christopher Hitchens next, debating the social effects of religion. Held in Toronto, this is just under 2 hours.
Well, welcome to Toronto, Canada for the Munk Debate on Religion in association with the BBC and Intelligence Squared. I'm Rudyard Griffiths, and it's my privilege to be your moderator tonight. I want to begin by welcoming the worldwide audience of the British Broadcasting Corporation, some 240 million people that will have access to this debate through the BBC World Service, BBC Online News, and BBC World News. It's just a fabulous opportunity to bring this debate to a truly global audience. I also want to welcome the tens of thousands of people watching this debate live and archived on monkdebates.com. It's terrific that they're part of this conversation too. And I also want to turn my attention to this hall, this spectacular hall, the lucky 2,700 people who are here in the flesh to listen to this debate tonight. Let it be said that on this day, thanks to the generosity of Peter and Melanie Munk, that Canada and its largest city, Toronto, is truly at the heart of the global conversation. Now, the moment we have all been waiting for. We have our motion before us. Be it resolved, religion is a force for good in the world. All we need is our debaters here center stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Tony Blair and Mr. Christopher Hitchens.
Thank you. Haven't done that before.
Tony Blair was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1997 to 2007. Among his many international roles today, he is the Quartet representative in the Middle East, working with the UN, the US, Russia, and the EU to try to secure a lasting peace in the region. After leaving politics, Mr. Blair converted to Catholicism, and he launched the Tony Blair Faith Foundation, a global initiative to promote respect and understanding among the world's major religions. Many of us in this room have read his recent best-selling memoir, A Journey, My Political Life. Christopher Hitchens is a British-born American author, journalist, and atheist. His regular Vanity Fair column, his prolific speeches and essays are essential reading for anyone and everyone concerned about global affairs. Christopher has a number of best-selling books too. Obviously, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, and his recently published memoir, Hitch 22. Christopher was recently diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and as such, we are doubly grateful that he and his family have joined us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, your debaters. Before getting our debate underway, let me just briefly run down how the next hour and a half will unfold. Each debater has been given 7 minutes for their opening remarks for and against the motion. Next, Mr. Hitchens and Mr. Blair will confront each other head-on, so to speak, through 2 rounds of formal rebuttals. We'll then bring you, the audience, into this debate through written questions. All of you received a written question card. At any time in the debate, fill that out, pass it down the aisle for collection. I'll also be taking some questions from audience members on the stage, some of the younger audience members here. Those questions will be asked directly to Mr. Blair and Mr. Hitchens. We'll also be bringing in our online audience through a series of questions, too. The debate will conclude with short 5-minute closing statements and a second audience vote on the motion. But before I call on our debaters for their opening statements, let's find out how the 2,700 people in this audience voted as they came into the hall. We're going to get those numbers up on the screen now. 22% of you in favor of the motion, 57 opposed, and fully 21% of you undecided. Now, we also, as you know, asked you a second question tonight. We asked you, depending on what you hear during the debate, are you open to changing your vote? Let's have those numbers too, please. Wow. 75% of this audience, 3/4, could change their vote depending what they hear in the next hour and a half. Ladies and gentlemen, we clearly have a debate on our hands. And remember, we will poll the audience again at the end of our proceedings to find out which of these two debaters was able to win by swaying us with the power of their arguments. Well, the time has come for introductory remarks. Christopher Hitchens, as we've agreed, you will begin first with your opening statement.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to the Monk family, great philanthropists, for making this possible. 7 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, for the foundational argument between religion and philosophy. It leaves me hardly time to praise my distinguished opponent. In fact, I might have to seize a later chance of doing that. I think 3.5 minutes for metaphysics and 3.5 for the material world won't be excessive. And I have a text. And it is from, because I won't take a religious text from a known extremist or fanatic, it's from Cardinal Newman. Recently, Prime Minister Blair's urging, beatified on his way to canonization, a man whose apologia made many Anglicans reconsider their fealty and made many people join the Roman Catholic Church, and is considered, I think rightly, a great Christian thinker. My text from the Apologia. The Catholic Church, said Newman, holds it better for the sun and moon to drop from heaven, for the earth to fail, and for all the many millions on it to die in extremest agony, than that one soul, I will not say will be lost, but should commit one venial sin, should tell one willful untruth, or should steal one farthing without excuse. You'll have to say it's beautifully phrased, ladies and gentlemen. But to me, and here's my proposition, what we have here, and picked from no mean source, is a distillation of precisely what is twisted and immoral in the faith mentality. Its essential fanaticism, its consideration of the human being as raw material, and its fantasy of purity. Once you assume a creator and a plan, it makes us objects in a cruel experiment whereby we are created sick and commanded to be well. I'll repeat that. Created sick and then ordered to be well. And over us to supervise this is installed a celestial dictatorship, a kind of divine North Korea. Greedy, exigent, I would say more than exigent, greedy for uncritical praise from dawn till dusk, and swift to punish the original sins with which it so tenderly gifted us in the very first place. However, let no one say there's no cure. Salvation is offered. Redemption, indeed, is promised at the low price of the surrender of your critical faculties. Religion, it might be said, must be said, would have to admit, makes extraordinary claims, but though I would maintain that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, rather daringly provides not even ordinary evidence for its extraordinary supernatural claims. Therefore, we might begin by asking, and I'm asking my opponent as well as you when you consider your voting, Is it good for the world to appeal to our credulity and not to our skepticism? Is it good for the world to worship a deity that takes sides in wars and human affairs? To appeal to our fear and to our guilt, is it good for the world? To our terror of death, is it good to appeal? To preach guilt and shame about the sexual act and the sexual relationship, is this good for the world? And asking yourself the while, are these really religious responsibilities, as I maintain they are? To terrify children with the image of hell and eternal punishment, not just of themselves, but of their parents and those they love. Perhaps worst of all, to consider women an inferior creation. Is that good for the world? And can you name me a religion that has not done that? To insist that we are created and not evolved in the face of all the evidence. To say that certain books of legend and myth, man-made and primitive, are revealed, not man-made code. Religion forces nice people to do unkind things, and also makes intelligent people say stupid things. Handed a small baby for the first time, is it your first reaction to think, beautiful, almost perfect, now please hand me the sharp stone for its genitalia that I may do the work of the Lord? No. It is, as the great physicist Steven Weinberg has very aptly put it, in the ordinary moral universe, the good will do the best they can, the worst will do the worst they can, but if you want to make good people do wicked things, you'll need religion. Now, I've got now 1 minute and 57 seconds to say why I think this is very self-evident in our material world. Let me ask Tony again, because he's here, and because the place where he is seeking peace is the birthplace of monotheism. So you might think it was unusually filled with refulgence and love and peace. Everyone in the civilized world has roughly agreed, including the majority of Arabs and Jews and the international community, that there should be enough room for 2 states, for 2 peoples in the same land. I think we have a rough agreement on that. Why can't we get it? The UN can't get it, the US can't get it, the Quartet can't get it, the PLO can't get it, the Israeli Parliament can't get it. Why can't they get it? Because the parties of God have a veto on it, and everybody knows that this is true. Because of the divine promises made about this territory, there will never be peace, there will never be compromise. There will instead be misery, shame, and tyranny, and people will kill each other's children for ancient books and caves and relics. And who is going to say that this is good for the world? And that's just the example nearest to hand. Have you looked lately at the possibility that we used to discuss as children in fear? What will happen when messianic fanatics get hold of an apocalyptic weapon? Well, we're about to find that out as we watch the Islamic Republic of Iran and its party of God allies make a dress rehearsal for precisely this. Have you looked lately at the revival of Tsarism in Putin's Russia, where the black-cowled, black-coated leadership of Russian Orthodoxy is draped over an increasingly xenophobic, tyrannical, expansionist and aggressive regime? Have you looked lately at the teaching in Africa and the consequences of it, of a church that says AIDS may be wicked, but not as wicked as condoms? That's exactly no seconds left, ladies and gentlemen. I've done my best. Believe me, I have more.
Christopher, thank you for starting our debate. Mr. Blair, your opening remarks, please.
Thank you. First of all, let me say it's a real pleasure to be with you all this evening, to be back in Toronto. It's a particular privilege and honour to be with Christopher in this debate. Let me first of all say that I do not regard the leader of North Korea as a religious icon. You will be delighted to know. I'm going to make, it's a biblical number, 7, but I'm going to make 7 points in my 7 minutes. The first is this. It is undoubtedly true that people commit horrific acts of evil in the name of religion. It is also undoubtedly true that people do acts of extraordinary common good inspired by religion. Almost half of healthcare in Africa is delivered by faith-based organizations, saving millions of lives. A quarter of worldwide HIV/AIDS care is provided by Catholic organizations. There is the fantastic work of Muslim and Jewish relief organizations. There are in Canada thousands of religious organizations that care for the mentally ill or disabled or disadvantaged or destitute. And here in Toronto, barely 1.5 miles from here, is a shelter run by Covenant House, a Christian charity for homeless youth in Canada. So the proposition that religion is unadulterated poison is unsustainable. It can be destructive. It can also create a deep well of compassion, and frequently does. And the second is that people are inspired to do such good by what I would say is the true essence of faith, which is, along with doctrine and ritual particular to each faith, a basic belief common to all faiths in serving and loving God through serving and loving your fellow human beings, as witnessed by the life and teaching of Jesus, one of love, selflessness and sacrifice, the meaning of the Torah. It was Rabbi Hillel who was once famously challenged by someone who said they would convert to religion if he could recite the whole of the Torah standing on one leg. He stood on one leg and said, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is the Torah, the rest is commentary, now go and do it." The teaching of Prophet Muhammad, saving one life as if you're saving the whole of humanity. The Hindu searching after selflessness. The Buddhist concepts of karuna, mudita, and metta, which all subjugate selfish desires to care for others, seek insistence specifically on respect for others of another faith. That, in my view, is the true face of faith. And the values derived from this essence offer to many people a benign, positive, and progressive framework by which to live our daily lives, stimulating the impulse to do good, disciplining the propensity to be selfish and bad. And faith, defined in this way, is not simply faith as solace in times of need, though it can be, nor a relic of unthinking tradition, still less a piece of superstition or an explanation of biology. Instead, it answers a profound spiritual yearning, something we feel and sense instinctively. This is a spiritual presence, bigger, more important, more meaningful than just us alone, that has its own power separate from our power, and that even as the world's marvels multiply, makes us kneel in humility, not swagger in pride. And that if faith is seen in this way, science and religion are not incompatible, destined to fight each other until eventually the cool reason of science extinguishes the fanatical flames of religion. Rather, science educates us as to how the physical world is and how it functions, and faith educates us as to the purpose to which such knowledge is put, the values that should guide its use, and the limits of what science and technology can do, not to make our lives materially richer, but rather richer in spirit. And so, imagine indeed a world without religious faith. Not just no place of worship, no prayer, no scripture, but no men or women who, because of their faith, dedicating their lives to others, showing forgiveness where otherwise they wouldn't, believing through their faith that even the weakest and most powerless have rights, and they have a duty to defend them. And yes, I agree, in a world without religion, the religious fanatics may be gone. But I ask you, would fanaticism be gone? And then realize that such an imagined vision of a world without religion is not in fact new. The 20th century was a century scarred by visions that had precisely that imagining in their vision and at their heart, and gave us Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot. In this vision, obedience to the will of God was for the weak. It was the will of man that should dominate. So, I do not deny for a moment that religion can be a force for evil. But I claim that where it is based essentially on a perversion of faith. And I assert that at least religion can also be a force for good. And where it is, that it's true to what I believe is the essence of faith. And I say that a world without religious faith would be spiritually, morally, and emotionally diminished. So, I know very well that you can point, and quite rightly Christopher does, to examples of where people have used religion to do things that are terrible and that have made the world a worse place. But I ask you not to judge all people of religious faith by those people any more than we would judge politics by bad politicians. Or, indeed, journalists by bad journalists. The question is, along with all the things that are wrong with religion, is there also something within it that helps the world to be better and people to do good? And I would submit there is. Thank you.
Well, Tony, your training in Parliament, I can see, had you just perfectly landing that right on the 7-minute mark. Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving into our rebuttal round, and I'd like the audience to get engaged, to applaud when they hear something that the debaters say that they like, and also to help me enforce our time limit. So when you see that clock ticking down, start applauding, and that'll move us through this in an orderly fashion. So Christopher, it's now your opportunity in our first of 2 rebuttal rounds to respond to Mr. Blair.
Do you have 4? Is that right?
There's 2 rounds of rebuttals. Each of you has the opportunity to go back and forth. And yes, you have 4 minutes for each speaker within each of those rounds, if that's not too confusing.
That sounds all right. I've got 4 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Then hold your applause, for heaven's sake. Well, now, in fairness, no one was arguing that religion should or will die out of the world. And all I'm arguing is that it would be better if there was a great deal more by way of an outbreak of secularism. Logically, if Tony's right, I would be slightly better off, not much, but slightly better off, being a Wahhabi Muslim, or a 12 Shia Muslim, or a Jehovah's Witness, than I am wallowing as I do in mere secularism. What I'm arguing, and really seriously, is what we need is a great deal more of one and a great deal less of the second. And I knew it would come up, that we'd be told about charity. And I take this very seriously. Because we know, ladies and gentlemen, as it happens, we're the first generation of people who do really, what the cure for poverty really is. It eluded people for a long, long time. The cure for poverty has a name, in fact. It's called the empowerment of women. If you give women some control over the rate at which they reproduce, if you give them some say, take them off the animal cycle of reproduction to which nature and some doctrine, religious doctrine, condemns them, and then if you'll throw in a handful of seeds perhaps and some credit, the floor of everything in that village, not just poverty, but education, health and optimism will increase. It doesn't matter, try it in Bangladesh, try it in Bolivia, it works all the time. Name me one religion that stands for that, or ever has. Wherever you look in the world and you try to remove the shackles of ignorance and disease and stupidity from women, it is invariably the clerisy that stands in the way. Or in the case of Now, furthermore, if you're going to grant this to Catholic charities, say, which I would hope are doing a lot of work in Africa, if I was a member of a church that had preached that AIDS was not as bad as condoms, I'd be putting some conscience money into Africa too, I must say. But it won't bring... I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be funny. If I was trying to be funny, you mistook me. It won't bring back the millions of people who've died wretched deaths because of that teaching. That still goes on. I'd like to hear a word of apology from the religious about that, if it was on offer. After all, otherwise I'd be accused of judging them by the worst of them. And this isn't done, as Tony says so wrongly, in the name of religion. It's a direct precept, practice, and enforceable discipline of religion. Is it not, sir, in this case? I think you'll find that it is. But if you're going to say, all right, the Mormons will tell you the same. You may think it's a bit cracked to think that Joseph Smith found another Bible buried in upstate New York, but you should see our missionaries in action. I'm not impressed. I'd rather have no Mormons and no missionaries, quite honestly, and no Joseph Smith. Do we grant to Hamas and to Hezbollah, both of whom will tell you and incessantly do, look at our charitable work. Without us, Effendi, the poor of Gaza, the poor of Lebanon, where would they be but for our... And they're right. They do a great deal of charitable work. It's nothing compared to the harm that they do, but it's a great deal of work all the same. I'm also familiar with the teachings of the great Rabbi Hillel. I even know where he plagiarized the story from, if he had access to the stuff. The injunction not to do to another what would be repulsive if done to yourself is found in the Analects of Confucius, if you want to date it. But actually it's found in the heart of every person in this room. Everybody knows that much. We don't require divine permission to know right from wrong. We don't need tablets administered to us 10 at a time in tablet form on pain of death to be able to have a moral argument. No, we have the reasoning and the moral suasion of Socrates and of our own abilities. We don't need dictatorship to give us right from wrong, and that's my lot. Thank you.
In the name of fairness and equity, Mr. Blair, I'm going to give you an additional 25 seconds for your first rebuttal.
First of all, I don't think we should think that because you can point to examples of prejudice in the name of religion, that bigotry and prejudice and wrongdoing are wholly owned subsidiaries of religion. There are plenty of examples of prejudice against women, against gay people, against others that come from outside the world of religion. And the claim that I make is not that everything the church has done in Africa is right, but let me tell you one thing it did do, and it did it whilst I was Prime Minister of the UK. The churches together formed a campaign for the cancellation of debt. They came together, they succeeded, and the first beneficiaries of the cancellation of debt were young girls going to school in Africa because for the first time they had free primary education. So I agree that not everything the church or the religious communities have done around the world is right, but I do say, at least accept, that there are people doing great work day in, day out, who genuinely are not prejudiced or bigoted, but are working with people who are afflicted by famine and disease and poverty, and they are doing it inspired by their faith. And of course it's the case that not everybody... Of course it's the case that you do not have to be a person of faith in order to do good work. I've never claimed that. I would never claim that. You know, I know lots of people, many, many people, who are people not of faith at all, but who do fantastic and decent work for their communities and for the world. My claim is just very simple. There are nonetheless people who are inspired by their faith to do good. I mean, I think of people I met some time ago in South Africa, nuns who were looking after children that were born with HIV/AIDS. Now, these are people who are working and living alongside and caring for people inspired by their faith. Is it possible for them to have done that without their religious faith? Of course. It's possible for them to have done it. But the fact is, that's what motivated them. So what I say to you is, at least look, what we shouldn't do is end up in a situation where we say, right, we've got 6 hospices here and 1 suicide bomber there, and how does it all equalize out? That's not a very productive way of arguing this. And actually, I thought one of the most interesting things that Christopher said is that we're not going to drive religion out of the world. And that's true, we're not. And actually, I think for people of faith to have debates with those who are secularists is actually good and right and healthy, and it's what we should be doing. And I'm not claiming that everyone should congregate on MySpace. I'm simply claiming one very simple thing, that if we can't drive religion out of the world because many people of faith believe it and believe it very deeply, let's at least see how we do make religion a force for good, how we do encourage those people of faith who are trying to do good, and how we unite those against those who want to pervert religion and turn it into a badge of identity used in opposition to others. So, I would simply finish by saying this. There are many situations where faith has done wrong. But there are many situations in which wrong has been done without religion playing any part in it at all. So let us not condemn all people of religious faith because of the bigotry or prejudice shown by some, and let us at least acknowledge that some good has come out of religion, and that we should celebrate.
Christopher, your second rebuttal, please.
I have a second one. Oh my God. It's an amazing test of audience tolerance. Well, all right. Well, how splendidly you notice we progress, ladies and gentlemen. Now it's, okay, some religious people are sort of all right. I think I seem to be bargaining one of the greatest statesmen of the recent past down a bit. Not necessarily opposed to that. Just to finish on the charity point, I once did a lot of work with a man called Sebastião Salgado. Some of you will know him, great man, great photographer. He was the UNICEF ambassador on polio questions. I went to Calcutta with him, elsewhere. Nearly got rid of polio, nearly made it join smallpox as a disease, a thing of the past, a filthy memory, except for so many religious groups in Bengal and elsewhere, Afghanistan, West Africa, so on, telling their children, don't go and take the drops. It's a conspiracy, it's against God, it's against God's design. By the way, that argument isn't terribly new. When smallpox was a scourge, Timothy Dwight, the great divine who was the head of Yale, said taking Dr. Jenner's injection was an interference with God's design as well. That's sort of, by the way, you need something like UNICEF to get major work done if you want to alleviate poverty and misery and disease. And for me, my money will always go to organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, like Oxfam and many others, who, strange enough, go out into the world, do good for their fellow creatures for its own sake. They don't take... They don't take the Bible along, as people do to Haiti all the time. We keep catching them doing it. Their money is being spent flat out on proselytization. It's a function of the old thing that was hand in hand with imperialism. It's the missionary tradition. They can call it charity if they will, but it doesn't stand a second look. So much on the business of doing good, except perhaps to add, since I have you for some extra minutes, Mr. Blair and I at different times gave quite a lot of our years to the Labour Party and to the Labour movement. And if the promise of religion was true, had been true, right up until the late 19th century in, say, Britain or North America or Canada, that good works are what's required and should be enough, and those who give charity should be honoured, those who receive it should be grateful. Two rather revolting ideas in one, I have to say. There would be no need for human and social and political action. We could rely on being innately good, which we know we can't rely upon, which I never suggested that we could, or should. So, now now I'm intrigued now. So religion could be a good thing after all. Sometimes we think. So now the proposition. What would a religion have to do to get that far? Well, I think it would have to give up all supernatural claims. It would have to say... Please. It would have to say, no, you are not to do this under the threat of reward, heaven, or the terror of punishment, hell. No, we can't offer you miracles. Find me the church that will say, forget all that. Faith healing, no. would have to give that up. It would have to give up the idea of an eternal, unalterable authority figure who was judge, jury and executioner against whom there could be no appeal and who wasn't finished with you even when you died. That's quite a lot for religion to give up, don't you think? But who would not say it would be better off without it if it was what Tony Blair would like it to be? An aspect of humanism, an aspect of compassion, an aspect of the realizations of human solidarity, the knowledge that we are in fact all bound up one with another, that we have responsibilities to one to another, and that, as I do when I give blood, partly because I don't lose the pint forever, I can always get it back, but that there's actually a sense of pleasure to be had in helping your fellow creature. I think that should be enough. Thank you.
Tony, it must feel like the House of Commons all over again.
I don't know, so far they're a little politer actually.
Your final rebuttal, please.
Yeah. It all depends, I guess, what your experience of religious people is. I mean, my experience of the people I was with last week in Africa that include deeply religious people is not actually that they're doing what they're doing because of heaven and hell. They're doing it for love of their fellow human beings. And that's, I think, something very fine. What's more, that they believe and that this love of their fellow human beings is bound up with their faith. So it's not something, you know, yes, of course, it is absolutely true. They might decide to do this irrespective of the fact that they have religious faith, but their faith, they feel, is an impulse to do that good. And, you know, I don't recognize the description of the work that they do in what Christopher said. In Sierra Leone, where I was, you have Christians and Muslims working together to deliver healthcare in that country. That's religion playing a positive role. They're working across the faith divide and doing it because they, again, believe that their faith impels them to do that. When we look back in history, yes, of course, you can see plenty of examples of where religion has played a negative role. You can see great examples, for example, in the abolition of slavery, where religious reformers joined with secular reformers in order to bring about the abolition of slavery. And let's get away from this idea that religion created poverty. You know, there are bad things that have happened in the world outside of religion, right? And when you look at the 20th century and you see the great scars of political ideology around views that had absolutely dramatically at their heart fascism, the communism of Stalin, absolutely at their heart was the eradication of religion. Then what I would say to you is, get rid of religion, but you're not going to get rid of fanaticism, and you're not going to get rid of the wrong in the world. So the question is, how then do we make sense of religion having this vital part in the world today, since it is growing and not diminishing? How do we make sense of this? And this is where, yes, there is an obligation on the people of faith to try and join across the faith divide with those of other faiths. That's the reason for my foundation. We have people of different religious faiths. We've actually got a program where young people team up with each other of different faiths and work together in Africa on malaria, back in their own faith communities, and here in Canada. We have a schools program that allows schools to link up using the technology so that kids of different faiths can talk to each other across the world. And here's the thing, when they start to talk about their faith, they don't actually talk in terms of heaven and hell and a God that's an executioner of those that do wrong. They talk in terms of their basic feeling that love of God can be expressed best through love of neighbour and actions in furtherance of the compassion and help needed by others. And this is in 2007, you know, religious organisations in the US gave 1.5 times the amount of aid that USAID did. Not insignificant. So my point is very, very simple. You can list all the faults of religion, just as you can list the faults of the politicians, the journalists, and any other profession. But for people of faith, the reason why they try to do good, and when they do it, is because their faith motivates them to do so. And that is genuinely the proper face of faith.